Calories in versus calories out is terrible advice for somebody trying to lose body fat. If you're struggling to lose body fat, most people will just give you the same generic, useless advice that circulates online, on Reddit, and by shitfluencers, and that is, it's just calories in versus calories out, bro. Although this statement is true at a very baseline, elementary level, it fails to provide any nuance or practical applications for losing body fat. Ultimately, calories in versus calories out is horrible advice. Today, I'm going to talk about how and why people become overweight in the first place, some of the negative health consequences of carrying too much body fat, and finally, I'll provide some science-based strategies for losing body fat and maintaining a lower body fat percentage. In order to lose body fat, I think it's really important that we understand why our society has gained so much of it in the first place. I think arguably the biggest factor is the wide availability of low-cost food options that are extremely high in calories. On almost every corner of every street is a fast food restaurant that has low-cost food options but are extremely high in calories. When you couple that with the low-cost processed food options at almost every single grocery store, you've got the perfect formula for high-calorie foods available to almost anybody for very little cost. The second main factor of how we've become so overweight is the prevalence of sedentary lifestyles and just a general lack of physical activity. A lot of people work 9-to-5 jobs where they sit behind a desk all day, and the only activity that they get while they're at work is either getting up to use the restroom or walking over to the water cooler. This environment of very little physical activity and steps makes it really difficult to maintain a low body fat percentage. A long time ago, humans used to have to travel by foot in order to find food, and when they did find food, there usually wasn't a ton of it. Now you can drive up to your local neighborhood Mickey D's, pull up to the drive-thru, and you don't even have to walk inside the restaurant to get as much food as you want. The third and probably most under-discussed factor is a genetic predisposition towards obesity. We have evidence that shows some individuals have genes that predispose them to becoming obese when you put them in an obesogenic environment. Well, we already determined that we currently live in an obesogenic environment. So these individuals are automatically at a disadvantage. However, these individuals would probably not be obese if they were in a non-obesogenic environment. In other words, if you put an obese person in a time machine, Back to the Future style,
when this baby hits 88 miles per hour, you're gonna see some serious shit.
And send them back to a hunter-gatherer society where food is scarce and physical activity has to be high, they probably wouldn't be obese. This is good news because it means that it's entirely possible and even probable for somebody to lose body fat, even if they're genetically predisposed to becoming obese, just by changing their environment, which we'll talk more about later. So we discussed some of the factors of why and how our society is rapidly gaining more and more weight, but why is having a high body fat percentage even a bad thing in the first place? A lot of people's motivation to lose body fat seems to be for aesthetic purposes, i.e. to quote unquote look better. This makes sense from an evolutionary standpoint, but only if you view your own high body fat percentage to be unattractive towards potential mates. If you have this viewpoint about your own high body fat percentage, it would make sense that you would want to lower your body fat percentage in order to increase your chances of finding a mate. However, not everybody has this viewpoint about themselves or about other people. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. A lot of people don't think high body fat percentages are inherently unattractive. As a result, I don't think your primary motivation for losing body fat should be based on our society's perception of what is generally considered attractive, because we know that this perception changes over time and varies widely from person to person. I think the primary motivation for losing excess body fat should be the negative health complications associated with excess body fat. Some of the negative health impacts of high body fat percentages include sleep apnea, cancer, increased risks of heart disease and stroke, osteoarthritis, type 2 diabetes, just to name a few. Also, some studies even suggest that obesity can reduce your lifespan by about 14 years. But I think what's even more concerning than the effects that obesity can have on the quantity of your lifespan is the effects that it can have on the quality of your lifespan. Someone who is obese or extremely overweight may not be able to do the physical activities that they enjoy, which can lead to social isolation and even depression. At the beginning of this video, I said calories in versus calories out is terrible advice. And it is, I stand by that. But what's even worse advice is telling somebody that a specific macronutrient, like carbs or dietary fat, or even a specific type of food, is inherently more fattening than other types of foods or macronutrients, even when calories are equated. And this simply isn't true. We have countless studies and a high volume of evidence that suggests consuming more energy, i.e. calories, than you expend leads to the addition of fat tissue, regardless of what foods that energy comes from. The law of the conservation of energy states that energy cannot be created nor destroyed. Therefore, if you consume more energy than you expend, that energy or calories, they have to be stored somewhere. And in most cases, it's stored as fat tissue. The example that I like to give to people who claim that carbs, dietary fat, and or processed foods are the sole contributors to obesity is the slice of cake example. If you gave somebody a slice of cake every single day for 30 days, and that's all they were allowed to eat every single day, do you think that they would gain or lose weight? Even though a slice of cake is highly processed, has a ton of saturated fat, and a bunch of carbs from all the sugar that's in it, the person in this hypothetical example who's only eating one slice of cake every day for 30 days would obviously lose weight. That's because the slice of cake is probably around 800 calories and the average person burns between 1,500 and 2,500 calories a day, which would create a substantial caloric deficit. Let's do another example just for fun. You've got a dog that's overweight and you take him to the vet, and the vet tells you that the dog needs to lose weight. What do? Do you think you should put your dog on a keto diet, buy him a waist trainer and juice cleansers? Or do you think you should just feed him less and take him for more walks? The answer seems quite obvious, but there's a lot of people out there that don't think the laws of thermodynamics apply to human beings. And of course, unfortunately, you'll always have people that take their own experience of N=1 and apply it to a much broader or larger group of people and claim that it works for everybody. There's always people that say, well, I tried keto and I lost 20 pounds, or I tried intermittent fasting and I lost 20 pounds. But you can always trace it back to a reduction in caloric intake. In the case of a keto diet, take somebody who eats the same thing every single day, and with each meal they have a side of potatoes. They decide to get on the keto diet and they take out the potatoes from each meal. Boom, you have now reduced your caloric intake for the day. So therefore you will start to lose body fat. Again, in the case of intermittent fasting, you eat the same things every day, you just cut out breakfast, therefore reducing your caloric intake. The reason that some foods get a bad reputation and are deemed inherently more fattening than other foods is just because they are much easier to overconsume on the calories. For example, cake and ice cream get this reputation because they're high in saturated fat, they're high in sugar, they have a little bit of sodium, and there's very little protein. This combination of sugar, saturated fat, sodium, and very minimal protein can actually override our natural satiety signals sent from our brain, which causes us to overeat on those certain foods and therefore eat a surplus of calories. This is exactly the formula that the corrupt snack food companies use to get people to eat more and more of their products and therefore just spend more money on those products. They are literally creating a formula in their foods that trigger a hormonal and brainwave response in humans similar to that of a drug addiction. However, there are not foods, food groups, or ingredients like saturated fat and sugar that are inherently more fattening than others when calories are equated. But there are certain foods that are easier to overconsume than others, but it'll always come back to energy in versus energy out at the end of the day. But for some reason, I keep saying that calories in versus calories out is bad advice. It's not bad advice because the statement itself is wrong necessarily. It's bad advice because it doesn't give people practical, sustainable strategies for losing body fat and maintaining a lower body fat percentage.
You could just tell somebody calories in versus calories out, and they could try a watermelon diet for 1 or 2 months and lose 15 pounds. But during this time, their hair starts to thin out and their body becomes brittle because they're not getting the necessary micro nor the macronutrients required for good health. And they'll probably rebound the next month and just gain the 15 pounds right back because eating only watermelon for the rest of your life is not sustainable. This is called crash dieting, which can lead to yo-yo dieting, which is just large fluctuations in weight loss and weight gain because you don't have sustainable habits that are conducive to maintaining a lower body fat percentage. People need practical advice and sustainable habits, not calories in versus calories out. I'm going to give you 5 science-based strategies that you can use to lose body fat that have proven to be effective and sustainable. I should mention that none of these strategies are necessarily required to lose body fat. Remember, we just went over that it all comes down to an energy equation. You need to burn more calories than you consume. But I think these strategies will help you get on the right side of that equation. I should also mention that there are a ton of other strategies that I'm not going to mention in this video that could help you lose body fat. I just don't want this video to be 2 hours long, so I'm only going to give you 5. But if you find that these 5 strategies don't work for you, please do some research and find some strategies that do work because there's plenty of them out there. The first strategy is to track your calories. You do not have to track your calories every single day for the rest of your life. This is not sustainable for most people. However, I think it's helpful to track your calories every now and then to give you a better idea of how many calories are in certain foods. A lot of people, when they first start tracking calories, are really surprised to find how many calories can be in just a tablespoon of peanut butter or even the olive oil that they cook with. When people in weight loss treatment are asked to keep a food diary and track what types of foods they're eating and how much they're eating, there's almost always an immediate reduction in caloric intake as a result of tracking their food. This means that just by simply being more aware of the types of food you're eating and how much of them you're eating, it will most likely help you lose body fat. The second strategy is to change your food environment. If somebody's recovering from alcoholism, do you think it's a good idea to keep their liquor cabinet stocked at all times? The same thing applies if you find yourself overeating. If you're constantly snacking on certain foods that you keep around the house, stop buying those foods. If you always go through the drive-thru or get takeout for lunch, start meal prepping. If you don't want to meal prep, there are plenty of meal delivery services that literally send you pre-made meals that you can just stick in the microwave for 2 minutes. I personally use Factor Meals. I'm not affiliated with them in any way, but I would recommend it to anybody who doesn't have time to meal prep or just doesn't want to. However, it is a much more expensive option than just simply meal prepping yourself. I want to be clear, this does not mean that you have to completely eliminate certain foods from your diet and never eat them again. It is perfectly fine to have a slice of cake on your birthday or go get ice cream with your kids every now and then. The thing you want to avoid is the overconsumption of these foods. Occasional consumption of these foods probably won't hurt your progress in the long run. The third strategy is to eat more protein, fruits, and vegetables. High protein foods, as well as fruits and vegetables, can be more satiating compared to other foods like refined carbohydrates. Fruits and vegetables give you a lot of bang for your buck because they make you feel more full without as many calories. Again, you don't have to completely eliminate refined carbs or any food for that matter, but a diet that's high in protein, fruits, and vegetables is typically very conducive to maintaining a lower body fat percentage. The fourth strategy is to lift weights. If your primary concern is your general health, then the overall goal should be to lose body fat, not weight in general necessarily. There are a ton of benefits of building muscle and getting strong, but in this video, we'll focus on the ones that relate most closely to fat loss. It takes energy, i.e. calories, to build and maintain muscle tissue. When you lift weights, more of the calories that you do consume will be used to build new muscle tissue as well as maintain the muscle tissue that you've already built. This means more of the energy that you consume will be diverted towards building and maintaining muscle tissue rather than fat tissue. Also, muscle tissue is metabolically more expensive than fat tissue. And what that means is people that carry more muscle tissue burn a few more calories throughout the day compared to those that don't have a ton of muscle tissue, all else being equal. And yes, this advice applies to women as well. It is a myth that women will immediately turn into She-Hulks as soon as they start lifting weights. If they're taking anabolic steroids, that's a different story, but most of the time they're not. Also, I've noticed that people that lift weights tend to store their body fat in more favorable locations around their body. In other words, they tend to store more body fat in their arms, maybe their chest, glutes, or legs compared to their stomach. But I will say this is purely an anecdotal observation. I don't have any evidence to back up this claim, so just take that one with a grain of salt. And the last strategy that I want to give you is to find easy ways to increase your daily activity level. Take the stairs instead of the elevator, join a club sport league, go for a hike, take a walk during your lunch break. There's a ton of different things. Anything that you can do that increases your average daily energy expenditure and that you can do for several years of your life is going to be super beneficial. Hopefully after watching this video, you have a better idea of how and why we gain body fat, some of the negative health implications of carrying too much body fat, and hopefully you also walk away from this with some practical, sustainable strategies for maintaining a lower body fat percentage. Don't beat yourself up if your body fat percentage is not where you want it to be. What we need to realize is that we live in a society that makes it extremely difficult to maintain a healthy body fat percentage. But it's certainly possible to break through this system. It just requires a bit of education and using some of the strategies that I outlined previously to get somebody out of this vicious cycle. And it's worth it.